Welcome to this edition of the Capital Brief. I'm Seth Berenzweig from Berenzweig Leonard. We're here in our studio, BL Media Studio in downtown Tysons, Virginia, back with my friend and colleague, John Tamny. John, how you doing?
Great. Prettiest fall in all my years in D.C.
Are you getting psyched for Thanksgiving? Starting to think about how many
Best time
turkeys
of year.
and beers?
Best time of year.
There
all
you
that.
go.
There's nothing like it.
Nothing like it, exactly. Well, today we're going to be following along on the sideline of the news with regard to some pretty high-level corporate breakups. We're going to talk about those and see if that is indicative of a start of a trend and what that means as far as business growth is concerned moving forward through the latter part of this year and into next. So, John, I've noticed in the media there are a number of breakups that have had some prominence that have been going on, and of course the two that come to mind initially is GE as well as J&J. Just to kind of set the table here, tell us a little bit of a recap of what's going on there and you know what you think the significance of that is from a broader perspective.
Well, it brings to mind what happened in the 1980s in a sense. Let's never forget in the 60s and 70s, conglomerates were the thing. ITT and there were Bell and Howell, and Gulf Western was one of the most famous ones. They bought Paramount Studios. They just had very vast businesses. And some believe to this day that one reason Michael Milken got so much on the wrong side of other investment banks and also government officials is here's a guy who comes along and says these conglomerates are a joke and funded the guys who came in and broke them up, that said these businesses would be better not combined in these unwieldy ways. And so Milken, in addition to all the amazing things he did for capitalism, basically put a bullseye at everything investment banks and big business had done for decades and said, we're going to redo this all together.
Right.
And so it's interesting to consider now, well, GE became one of the most valuable company in the world.
Under Jeffrey Immelt, but even before him,
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch.
Immelt, and who's to say you can't tie everything to him? The company started to implode, at least from a valuation standpoint under Immelt. Now, people have different arguments about why that occurred. But Jack Welch and GE were in many ways the contradiction to Milken's argument that they became the most valuable company in the world despite having a vast array of businesses. And so how fascinating now that GE is now doing what so many felt in many ways it should have been done long ago.
You know, it's funny. My dad used to work for GE. He was at NBC.
Oh, wow.
And NBC got into that whole scoop with RCA and General Electric. And it was, you know, back in the, say, the 80s, it was pretty heady times. There was a lot going on, and it was good to be the king. And, of course, Jack Welch was just, you know, I mean, he was really ultra celebrity status and Six Sigma and all of that, and it seemed to be something that was very much in vogue. And you're right. I mean, now fast forward into where we are today, and then you see the GE breakup, J&J, and you know, it serves a little bit in contradiction to some of the other aspects of the M&A market that's going on right now. Although some of the mergers and acquisitions that are happening are very much in alignment in terms of if it's a vertical integration, there are things that still are trying to focus very much on a very compact ultimate business long-term strategy. But when you see this happening right now, do you think that this is indicative of a trend? And is there something out there that's causing it? Because obviously we're living through very different corporate times.
Mm-hmm. I think they always say in the NFL it's a copycat league, and so one thing happens and it leads to a domino effect where there's a lot of the same. My guess is this is going to be the beginning of a trend, just because, not for any major reason, but my guess is that GE and J&J are indicative of a broader viewpoint that specialization is the key among individuals. It should also be among companies. There's probably some really great potential locked into a bureaucracy that basically can't breathe, that can't be realized inside a bureaucracy. So my guess is that this isn't going to be the end.
Right.
But at the same time, I'll speculate fairly confidently that there is going to be a CEO or CEOs who come along who once again disprove the lie, and they're going to say, wait a second, there's great value to this. A GE is not going to be the last great conglomerate.
Yeah, and the hot M&A space in not only here in the Washington D.C. area but nationally, I think supports that point. The focus on specialization and as they say on the street, quote, unlocking the value of a lot of these companies. Spin-offs are exciting from a shareholder perspective. It creates new value. It creates new issues. I tend to believe that the specialization is driven in part by technology, which of course is just light years away from where it was in the 80s and the 90s for obvious reasons. But the advent of technology and how things are changing is more likely to create certain segments of industry that become obsolete, and then they end up becoming pieces of the larger decay that are albatrosses around the necks of the J&Js and the General Electrics, which is one of the reasons why I think you're seeing an acceleration in the trend of corporate breakups, because it's going to allow a more focused, more cost-effective approach. It does unlock shareholder value. It creates different market cap activity, and a lot of that I think probably is driven by technology. And it's also, and technology of course blends into other areas beyond traditional heavy industrial. Technology is also having direct impacts in medical AI technology as well too. So. Is this a trend that you think is something that we will continue to see going into the next couple of years, or as you say, there'll be other people coming along that might be bucking this trend and proving otherwise?
Well, my sense is that yes, it will be a trend, and not just partially because of this, but also because, as you allude, technology. Look at Kylie Jenner, and I know some will think of that reference and say, okay, that's absurd, but she built what, at least in a valuation sense, was $1 billion company with 7 full-time employees and 5 part-time. And why was she able to do this? Well, relative to the past, she already had a brand and she had an online following that is free. She had how many millions of followers on Instagram and the different social media. So her marketing was taken care of.
Less barriers to entry.
At which point she had access to outsiders who could create basically the makeup kits. That's my understanding, that what it was that people wanted. She didn't need to hire any of them, so she had marketing taken care of. She was Kylie Jenner, and then others outside of the business could do the day-to-day work of putting things together. And so she needed a very small grouping to do this. And so my sense is that you're going to see a lot of this. You just don't need these big bureaucracies anymore, at which point the spin-offs are going to be fairly interesting.
Yeah.
Now, is this going to be a forever thing? As we say this, Koch Industries is a conglomerate that is one of the most valuable companies in the world. There are always instances that disprove the assumption that, you should break things up. Can we talk about Berkshire Hathaway? That is a vast array of businesses that don't really have anything in common. A good CEO is a good CEO and knows how to hire. The genius of a CEO is they know how to hire the people below them to run the businesses.
Right.
And so I don't think this is going to be the end, but we cannot deny that the need for a big bureaucracy, for an infrastructure in order for a company to grow, is rapidly moving to the past, and that's a really exciting step.
Well, you talk about Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, you talk about someone who's old school. I don't mean that in terms of ageism. I mean that in terms of the traditional ways of being able to run a tight ship and being able to navigate a bigger ship because it's run in a much more efficient way. One of the doors that you've opened, which is a really interesting related aspect of the market, relates to the media industry. The media industry has been completely changed over the last couple of years. Of course, COVID had an effect on that, but completely aside from that, the media industry has completely transformed, and all of these big players, even in this area, all of the big corporate players and these media conglomerates have really taken a beating. And part of the reason is because a lot of the foundational aspects of how they are pursuing, for example, linear programming on television is taking a beating because of the social media that you're talking about. So when you talk about Albatron or some of the other entities that have been trying to develop broader footprints on television spectrum, those companies have really been decimated, and they just haven't been able to survive. So they end up either going into smaller pieces, or quite frankly, they just end up collapsing. So the media industry is certainly an interesting part of that. And there's just a lot of innovation through social media, and you're mentioning people who are catering to a younger audience, and it's easier to be able to find no barriers to entry if you're able to find hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers on social media without spending a dime. Can you imagine thinking of a business model even 5 or 8 years ago where you would say you're going to be able to acquire 1 million followers, and you don't have to spend anything other than your time? I mean, I can't even imagine if that ever would have existed before.
Well, it's huge, and I think it's got to be stressed about this, that this is why there's always this assumption. Every new generation, or every generation that passes into the elderly 30, 40, 50, 60 stage, always looks down on the younger ones and says they're just so lazy, they're so entitled, they don't understand what a day's work means. And then this goes back literally over 100 years in the United States. We've always been looking down on the newcomers, yet the newcomers always seem to outperform us. And I think we're talking about why. And it's so important. Although young people may have a different view of what work is, they may have a different view of what the meaning of work should be, they know this technology intimately. And the way that you and I watch TV, the way that you and I consume media is so different from what a typical young person does. And so these young, again, Kylie Jenner was able to figure out a remarkable business model and in a very low-cost way. If the news accounts of it are to be believed. And so young people are going to figure out things. They're going to figure out ways to build businesses that it doesn't insult us to say that you and I can't possibly imagine. And so it really to me, it always makes me excited about the future, what they're going to come up with.
You reminded me of something that happened with my son the other week. We were hanging out, and he said, "Hey, let's turn on let's turn on the replays from the Packers game last weekend." And I immediately stood up, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, we're going to go to the TV." And he said, No, we're not going to go to the TV. And he just reached in, and he picked up his cell phone, and he just clicked a few things, and we watched just kind of an expedited, quick 5-minute version of the key plays of the Packers game, and he just, it was just in the palm of his hand. One of the things that I'd be interested to get your read on, and I'll go ahead and take a stab at this question first, is what are some of the upcoming new industry platforms that people, particularly of the more technology savvy segment of the industry, are going to be establishing as relatively brand new but huge upcoming market segments in the economy that are going to have a huge impact. So, for example, what I would point to as an answer for that is the blockchain industry. I think that blockchain is going to have a revolutionary impact on new job and corporate creation. Not only do you have companies that are creating the blockchain infrastructure, but you have whole industries that are going to feed into and be interconnected to the blockchain industry. So when you talk about these so-called Oracle companies, the Oracle connections into the Ethereum blockchain. It's going to be they're creating an input and output of fluid data to be able to feed smart contracts. The smart contracts have a very simple proposition in terms of executing a deal, but the information that flows into that is fluid and changes every minute in real time. So these companies that are creating a whole new layer of technology that didn't even exist 5 years ago, or arguably earlier than that, or sooner than that, that's going to be creating the new frontier of jobs. What do you see going into the next year or so in terms of new technology and the creation of new business opportunities in American industry that really excite you?
Well, if I knew, I'd be a billionaire. So
give me your stock tips.
No, but it's so since we're on the subject of GE and NBC, amid all this, is there's that advertisement that I think was played on the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, showing the Today Show back in the Jane Pauley, Bryant Gumbel era. So this is the early '90s. This www.com thing, and then sort of looking at and dismissing it, and then look at how transformative it was. And so it's exciting to think that who among us was demanding even something like Uber in the early 2000s? We knew we wanted something.
Right.
But I certainly didn't come. But
it wasn't even a concept.
The introduction of faster internet made this remarkable scenario possible, whereby
great example.
Anyone
transportation
with a phone could summon a driver. And you think about what that means. It's certainly true throughout history. What the rich enjoy is always a preview of what we'll all enjoy. And so what is this going to mean? The industries are going to be staggering. One thing for sure is that your son, by the time he's in his 30s, is going to be flying on private jets like it's nothing. That is a given. And then you expand that from that. What is faster internet going to mean, assuming that's going to be the platform of the future? What is the fluidity of capital via the blockchain going to mean? It's really exciting. The guess I have broadly, which I talked about last week, is that I think we're headed toward the entertainment economy. I think that the result of all this rapid specialization is going to result in more and more people's industry being something of an entertainment variety, whereby they get to do what they can't get enough of, only they're paid for it.
Interesting. And travel is really revolutionizing in the airline industry because now there's going to be technology coming out, and Boeing is working on this right now, that is going to be able to cut the travel time on a flight between New York and Los Angeles by roughly 50%. So, well, John, again, another really interesting conversation. I guess the last point I would say is that all these new opportunities are also an opportunity for capital investment. So one of the great things about a capitalist system is that we can all participate in a lot of these enterprises going forward. But we'll keep an eye on it as we get hungry and start to get ready for Thanksgiving. So thanks for stopping by.
Yes.